Hello and welcome to the Deb Calvert channel here on Bright Talk. I'm Deb Calvert, and today we're continuing the series of webinars that are meant for people in HR and in management looking to get some fundamentals to become more effective managers or to be able to be more effective in any role where you're needing to collaborate with other people. Last month we talked about finance for non-financial managers. Next time we're going to be talking about leading change initiatives. And today we're going to be getting a very high-level view of selling for those who aren't in sales. Some of you might be in sales. You might have at least ideas that you want to sell, or you might have some places where you want to be more influential. Others of you who have registered are frustrated because collaborating with the sales function is difficult. You're not quite sure how to read what they really want from you, and that makes it frustrating because you don't know what to deliver. And others of you might have some challenges related to feeling like sales railroads you. You're in a department that's viewed as a support department, and the people in selling sometimes take advantage. So I just want to talk about this very high-level overview of selling and the seller mindset and some very basic mechanics of selling. The aim here is to help you get a better grasp of what's really going on over there in the sales department and how you can align with that and speak more directly to it so that you're not hampered by anything going on over there. Along the way, I'm also going to give you some basics about selling so that you too can be more effective as you're selling. So we're going to understand sales, break it down, and then talk about the other pieces. If you're new to Bright Talk, let me point out a couple of features to you. First of all, thanks for joining me here. I always like to load up these talks, not just with the content and the slides that I'll deliver, but also with attachments and links so that if you're interested, you can do some deeper dive into what we're discussing. And this time I've included a PDF of the slides that I'm presenting. Feel free to print those out if you'd like, as well as some sales resources, some sales training, a chapter of a book, and a blog link for those of you who want to continue learning more about the basics of selling. I work in both sales and HR and am a leadership speaker, author, trainer, researcher, and I use those differences in the disciplines and the domains that I work in to continually inform and cross-pollinate ideas. So that's where I'm speaking from, is with a foot planted in both worlds. I do want to start off by talking about one of the biggest challenges the folks in selling face. And that is that there is a certain stereotype that causes the function of sales to sometimes grapple with the fact that sales seems a bit unsavory. People inside the organization who aren't in sales sometimes treat sales as if they're a little bit less professional, a little bit less honest, a little bit less focused on the good of the business versus their own personal good. All of that pushback inside an organization can tend to be very isolating for the people in sales. So that's one thing you'd want to know, is that sometimes there is a real challenge organizationally. Sales feels like they have to fight for what they want. At the very same time, that same stigma or stereotype, it reaches out into the rest of the world. So all the people that your sales team is selling to, they might feel like they have to put up that iron wall, that defense mechanism, because when approached by a salesperson, buyers do tend to be a little bit protective of themselves at first. That also is a real challenge for people in sales, to break through that barrier, to differentiate themselves, and to demonstrate their trustworthiness so that they can have a conversation that might lead to a sale. There's a third piece, and that is how sellers feel about themselves. I'm showing you a quote that opens the book called Stop Selling and Start Leading. I gave you a link to a free chapter from that. This book is about research with buyers and stories from sellers. This particular story is an example of how many sellers, people who are in a sales job, despite being in that job, sometimes feel less than noble in the work that they do. Not very many people enter sales because that's what they went to school to learn and do. Not very many people, when they enter sales, think that's going to be their full-time permanent career. And it's because of these outside messages. So if nothing else, try to, inside your organization, inside your own mindset, if you're not in sales, try to destigmatize selling. Don't adopt those stereotypes and automatically make those assumptions or hold those biases about selling, because most salespeople don't embody those stereotypes and don't want to be perceived in that way. It's a little unfair for them. Now, what sellers, buyers, and others who work with sellers ought to know to get past that and to be more empathetic is to understand the root of selling and to understand some of those misunderstandings. That way, if you help with hiring for the sales team, if you interact with and collaborate with people in sales functions, if you produce the work that they sell, this will all help you to be able to dialogue with them differently and to empathize with them in those challenges that they face. What I'm about to show you might also help you to be more effective in selling your own ideas. Now, what I'm showing you, this is sort of interesting. This is a graphic that shows the 4 different ways that people are motivated. And I want to show you this from 2 different perspectives. What you're looking at are 2 types of motivation, left and right. That's extrinsic. Anything that is outside of a person is an extrinsic motivator. That would include for your sales team things like sales commission, or things like a quota that's been set for them, or a leaderboard, who's going to be at the top of the leaderboard, who's going to win a contest, who is not going to lose their job if they don't make a quota. And what you heard were mostly positive extrinsic over in the upper left-hand corner, but you might have heard there at the end an extrinsic motivation like you will lose your job, or you will not make your commission, or you will not be eligible for that promotion if you don't. That's an external, extrinsic motivator that's negative. So we can have positive or negative extrinsic motivators. And on the right-hand side, we can also have intrinsic. These are the self-motivators, the ones that come from within us. And they too can be positive or negative. For people on your sales team, pride of helping a customer might be a positive intrinsic motivator. Fear of not living up to someone's expectations, disappointing someone, that might be a negative intrinsic motivator. Now here's the thing. Inside organizations, there's often a lot of frustration. It sometimes looks like sellers get certain privileges and perks, including all these commissions and incentives and contests. And what people are failing to understand is that those may not be the main drivers behind what a seller really wants. So for those of you in finance, I saw several of you had registered from finance. If you're asked to sweeten the commission plan, if you're asked to constantly focus on the goal setting in a way that incentivizes the sellers, please know that those are managers and directors in the sales function who are potentially over-relying on extrinsic motivators. Because the truth is, positive intrinsic motivation, upper right-hand corner, is the most effective way to compel action. It's the most effective way to motivate a person, to tap into what's important to them personally. And sales managers, sales directors, they tend to focus instead on the extrinsic. Commission is all about extrinsic. And we're missing opportunities to motivate sellers in other ways. So here's where you come in. No matter what your interaction with the sales function, you can't compete with extrinsic motivators like commission, but you can get to know a salesperson. You can understand what they want to do with that commission. This is just human to human, getting to know somebody. And you have an opportunity to actually motivate them just as much, if not more, by talking to them in terms of what matters to them personally. There's something else to notice here, and that is that as you're understanding the sales function, this is true for buyers too. Buyers are human. They have extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. Sellers tend to focus on the extrinsic side with their buyers. They don't spend enough time understanding the underlying needs of that buyer. So they focus instead on a negative extrinsic. You probably hear sellers talk about pain points and consequences of buyers not purchasing your product. That's a negative extrinsic motivator. Maybe you hear about the positives, the outcomes, the goals the buyer wants to reach. That would be an extrinsic positive. The features of your products, the benefits that your sellers are positioning. If they haven't done really quality discovery work to find out what's important to the buyer, they might be relying on the extrinsic side. Certainly, what's going on in marketing is probably extrinsic too, because it's generic. Marketing is for the masses. So if you are in any sort of function where you get to train salespeople or partner with them on demos or work with them to continually become more effective in selling, if you work in any of those areas and have an opportunity to help sellers see the value of intrinsically motivating buyers, well, I strongly encourage you to do that. Now, value is something that matters a lot in selling. When sellers talk to buyers, they need to be talking about value. And what I'm showing you now are the 4 rules of value. To understand selling, you have to understand these. You'd have to understand that value is personal. It's personal to the level of the individual. So if you have a company that buys from you, the thing they value isn't the same across every function or every person. The contacts, the decision makers, the decision influencers that sellers work with, they might all have something a little bit different that they value. And this is one of the complexities of selling, is that a seller has to know the value for each and every one of those people, the ones that they face and interact with, as well as the ones who are behind the scenes influencing the decision. And as you're collaborating cross-functionally, no matter what your role, you'll be able to more effectively support a seller or understand where a seller is coming from if you have this understanding that there is a great deal going on buyer to buyer, person to person. Because not only is value personal, but it's also transitory. It changes. We can't change what somebody else values, but their life circumstances, a job promotion, a new set of goals, personal leave of absence, all sorts of things change what an individual buyer values most at any given point in time. But while it's there, it's fixed. Until that external circumstance changes or something happens and the person themselves changes their intrinsic views of the world, that value is fixed. A seller cannot change it, so don't expect them to. If you're loading them up with good marketing materials, if you are talking to them about new ways of selling higher priced items, just remember that the buyer values what the seller is focused on and what the seller should be focused on. And we can never make assumptions about value. If you want to learn more about this sort of thing or you want to point your sellers toward it, there's an e-learning course, an attachment that you might want to use. Now, I want to get back to this feeling that sellers have about themselves. And a feeling you might have about yourself if you are a business owner. Some of you have signed up here, thank you. Or if you are a nonprofit board member or someone who raises money or someone who doesn't see themselves as a function, and yet you are tasked with sometimes doing the work of selling. Let me address this for just a moment, this ickiness factor that comes with the word selling. I want you to know that you're not alone, that many, many people, sometimes even those who choose a career in selling, many people shun this word. I mean, seriously, look at the business cards of a salesperson sometime, and more often you'll see some sort of euphemism that attempts to disguise the fact that this person's job is to sell something. And I think that's a shame. The work of selling is the backbone of our economy. It's noble work. People sell because other people need. Sales meets people's needs and is a noble profession. So I just want to strip it down to the bare essentials. These are really relevant for you as you think about supporting salespeople or doing any selling, even the selling of your ideas. And it's important to think about it this way because if you have any deep down reluctance or apprehension about selling, it's because you're catering to the stereotype rather than thinking about the other person's need, the person who might buy your idea, who has a need, and you have something to offer that could meet that need. That is the essence of good selling, and that's what you'd want sellers in your own organization to focus on, and that's what you'd want to have in mind as you think about them and as you interact with them. Don't be catering to the stereotype. Be thinking instead about that noble purpose. All of your customers, all of your potential customers out there, they have some sort of need. They lack something that's essential to them, and your sellers have an opportunity to meet that need. So our framework, right, to strip the ickiness out of selling, it's got to be just this simple. It's the intersection of a need. Buyer has a need, seller meets a need. And then it's time, when that's established, it's time to act on the need, to understand the value, to identify the needs, to know what a buyer values, to know what kinds of needs that we need to probe and understand. That's what selling is at its core. And you probably don't think of it that way if you've never been in selling. You probably think of it as something else. In your mind, you're thinking of the used car salesperson, the stereotype, who just wants to push something on you that you're not even sure you need. And you certainly don't want it yet. And they're using manipulative tactics, and they're making you feel pressured. And it's something that is oppressive. It feels like you're getting backed into a corner. That's not about need, and that's not about value, and that's why that's not the kind of selling that you'd want to focus on. And if you do work with sellers who are in that sort of a situation, look for ways that you can help them to learn more, do more, have a different approach to selling, because buyers don't respect and don't favorably respond to that. And there is a better way. Okay, so you don't have to be that kind of a seller. You don't have to think of sellers in that way. Just know that all of these challenges, these stereotypes, are among the biggest, realist challenges that people in the sales department are facing. And your own misperceptions might be getting in the way of cross-functional collaboration with sellers. Now, let me say that sometimes it is true that sellers have a false sense of urgency. They overdo it right down to the wire because they want to make every sale. They don't want to say no to a buyer. And sometimes that pressure ends up resulting in urgency that compromises the work product of other departments. That's also fact. That's true. And I hope that you're educating your sellers about the consequences of their actions. See, they're just focused on driving top-line revenue. And that's what you want a seller to be, focused on top-line revenue, getting as much of it as they possibly can. But you can educate a seller to help them see that the impact of their actions, despite bringing in that top-line revenue, could be eroding profit. Because if it's taking up extra time for you, if it causes overtime for others, if it compromises the quality of the product, if it costs more to meet this something that the seller has done, well, all of that takes away from profit. So you can educate, respect that the top line revenue has to come in, but don't stop there. Help the seller to develop some business acumen, and do that by understanding what they value, tapping into their intrinsic motivation. But yes, it's true, and people at the top of the organization, they will say, we need sales, sales matter, It might sometimes, depending on your function, make it feel like what you do is secondary, but just know that you're talking about something profit-wise, sellers are thinking about something revenue-wise, and both have merit, both are important, but there's a great divide between the two. You might be like two ships in the night if you don't have conversations about that. Okay, so here are some examples of need, and I put up some needs that you might have depending on the type of work that you do. We have a big mix of people who signed up for this presentation. Maybe you're dealing with some sort of need like the one that's on screen. Well, if a seller from outside your organization were to come in and try to sell you something, you would want them to understand and empathize with your needs. You'd want them to understand the impact of high turnover or the impact of some negative Glassdoor reviews that are causing people to opt out. You're getting ghosted by candidates. You'd want people coming to you, if you're in finance, to understand a little bit about what's in the shareholder report, at least the executive summary, and what that means to you. What's the impact on the work that you do? Similarly, when you work with the people in selling, if you want them to adopt your ideas, you would want to do research in kind and understand a little bit about what they're up against. Why are their quotas hard to reach? What is it that's going on that causes them to have lagging sales? What is it that's a barrier to them that's eroding their time and giving them less that they can do out in the field? You want them to understand you when they come to sell to you. You want them to understand you inside your own organization when they come to collaborate with you. And I hope you educate them, because the more they know about you and your function, the better their business acumen. And what that means is the better job they can do when they're out talking to their clients who also expect them to have business acumen. So educate, and then in turn, understand their role and their challenges too. And then it's not just about understanding, it's about talking about that actual need, thinking about the intrinsic motivators that fuel that need, and then being able to intersect where there is need. You've got an idea, they've got a problem, you can solve that problem. See, no one needs an actual product, whatever the product is. Nobody needs the ERP system. Nobody needs the CRM. Nobody needs to do the learning in the LMS just for the sake of doing it. Whatever it is you're asking someone else to do, they don't need that product. They need the outcome. They need the change that could come from interacting with that system. They don't need to fill out the reports and hand off the work to you on time, but they do need an outcome. So how can you talk about that outcome? How can you make whatever you're asking them to do really relevant to them individually and personally? This is what sellers do with buyers, and it's what you can do with sellers or anybody else so that you can become more effective and you can understand where they're coming from. Now, what I want to talk about next is some of the discomfort that comes with selling. Sellers experience this, and certainly people who are not in sales do too. The mindset to remember is that you're meeting a need, and when you meet a need, you're creating value. You're giving people something that they value. And if you have a little discomfort of asking, or if it feels like you're being a little pushy, if it feels like it's one-sided and it's just something that you're doing for yourself, please dial back into the need of the other person. This is what the best salespeople constantly do. They put the need of their buyers first and foremost, and then they're able to be passionate. They're able to be passionate enough to hear the word no over and over again, and yet to ask again, or to find out more information, or to make a call back 6 months later when they've gotten a continuance. Their passion to meet the need of the buyer overrides their sense of hurt pride when they hear the word no. They're assertive, sellers are, because they truly believe that they can help. Now, sellers do hear the word no a lot, and no is not a bad word. So if you're trying to empathize with a seller, don't be surprised when the word no is okay with them. Certainly, yes is the aim. We want to hear yes when we're trying to make a sell or when we're trying to have our ideas adopted. Yes is the best answer. But the second best choice is the word no. That's favorable over the word maybe. Maybe is a continuance. Maybe means I have to call somebody back over and over and over again, even if they're just stringing me along. Maybe means that I don't have enough information to qualify this buyer in or out, but I have a lot more work to do, and that work isn't going to go away until I get either a yes or a no. So for sellers who have many, many potential prospects out there, better to have a no so you can move on, and a seller should press to get a yes or a no so they can move on and aren't locked into a never-ending cycle of maybes, which can really mire them down. So if you go on sales calls with salespeople, or if you review the funnels of leads and you see a lot of maybes, you have an opportunity to coach that salesperson or to understand that this is something that's bogging them down. Let's talk about asking for a sale. Sellers have to do it. It's one of the things that makes sellers most uncomfortable when they're first doing this. And it might make you most uncomfortable if you are new to sales or doing something that feels like selling. And by the way, though, I want you to know that you've closed sales before. You've been closed. You're already accustomed to being closed. All sorts of proposals and purchasing scenarios end with a closing question. And you've done this sort of thing too. It's not completely unfamiliar to you. See, the one who initiates anything is the one who's asking for the resolution. We're looking for a yes or a no so that we can plan and adjust accordingly. On the receiving end, we expect there to be an opening that gives us an opportunity to clearly declare whether or not we're going to accept what's been offered to us. And there's always an obvious time for a close. It's actually awkward when there's no opportunity to proceed with clarity one way or the other. So then it begs the question, why are we so reluctant to close after we've offered something that's high value to the other party? Why would we be reluctant? Why do we stop short of asking for the sale and then expect a prospect to initiate that close for us? It doesn't work like that. It's because somehow when we step into this role formally, we get afraid. We get afraid to seem pushy, and we also get invested so much that we are afraid to hear no. So we don't ask. We let things be strung along so we don't have that awkward moment of hearing no or of pushing someone else to the place where they have to say no. And a lot of misunderstandings happen in that gray area where it's not yes and it's not no. No matter what kind of work you do, if there's not clarity, it's just this lingering gray area, well, you can't be effective there. You have a bit of an unspoken commitment remaining if you don't have the no. The problem is you don't know what the commitment looks like. You don't know what the expectations are. And so it's always going to be awkward in that way. It's much better to go ahead and close in any scenario. You've done it before, and you really can do it again. And sellers, no matter how long they've been doing it, sometimes they feel this way too. They feel awkward about closing. They shouldn't, of course. Easy for us to say here on this webinar, but it's much harder in real life when those feelings are very real. So again, a place where you might empathize. And go ahead and when you're talking to people in sales, ask for the close. They will not be offended because this is what they do for a living. And they'll admire it. They'll appreciate that there's closure on something that's no longer just lingering out there. So when is the right time to close? I'm putting this all in sales language, but you see by now that this fits other scenarios as well. When is it time to close up on something? Well, it's time to close when the need has been met and the person understands that the need has been met. And the value of meeting that need is right there front and center. Nobody's forgotten. If they have, you've spotlighted it, you've called their attention back to it, and you've negotiated through any little sticking points that there might be, any obstacles that they've expressed. And they've probably given you a few buying signals. They've asked some very specific questions, or they've affirmed that they like what they're hearing. And all you have to do at this point is just say, okay, let's get started then. No matter what your idea, no matter what you're asking people to do, closing is just taking the next step. You're meeting the need. Of course, you should take the next step. It's really, truly that simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Now, when it comes to working with sellers, they have a process. And the process looks something like this. It might go by different names in your organization, but I want to expose you to the process and understand what sellers are looking at and dealing with, some of the terminology that they're talking about. And at every one of these junctures in the sales process or in the sales funnel or the pipeline, whatever name it goes by, in every one of those junctures, there are some certain things that drive more or less productivity in selling. Here at the top of the funnel, which is all we really have time to talk about, so I'll camp out here for just a bit. At the top of the funnel, the very first thing that has to happen, of course, is there have to be leads. Before you can have buyers, you have to have people to call on, people who come to you, people who are not yet buyers, but they might become prospects. They're leads. They're people who may have a need for your product. They may see value. There's something that your product or service delivers that could help them in some way. And that's a great big bunch of people. That's why the top of the funnel is the widest thing. And what sellers have to do is somehow find or generate these leads. It could be your marketing department that does that. It could be your website that does that because it's got some great content or it draws people to it in some way. There might be many, many different ways. Maybe your organization does advertising. Maybe you have a very specific product that you're the only one you which ones are good leads and which ones it turns out aren't so good. Qualifications that make a lead a good one include things like, yes, this is actually a match. They do need what we have to sell. And yes, they have ability to buy it. And yes, this is the right decision maker. And there is a need. They're not under some million-year contract, so there's some shot of us being able to get in there and have that business come over to us because our product is superior in some way. Lead qualification includes many, many, many variables depending on the industry and on the type of product that you sell. But a qualified lead is better than a lead. A qualified lead is further down in the funnel, and the ones that aren't qualified now are tossed out. Okay, let me just take you through a couple things here about just those first two phases, then we'll come back to talk about the others as time allows. When it comes to generating leads, there are different strategies, and I'm showing you this just so that you will know how much goes into the strategy around selling and how many variables are involved and how it's not just as simple as go sell something. There's a lot to think about. These are the kinds of questions that an organization works out. If you're a business owner, these are the kinds of questions to think about as you set up your sales strategy. If you are collaborating with the sales function. These are the kinds of things that have gone on behind the scenes over in the sales division, but might be useful for you to know, because otherwise it'll just look like it's haphazard to you. But the more of this you know, the more you might be able to influence, understand, and collaborate. You don't have to know it all, but just know that there is thought behind it. So as leads are generated, there are thoughts that go behind that. How many do we need? What's our strategy? Are we going to have leads coming to us, or are we going to go out and find our leads? And who's doing that work? Is that marketing? Is some of it automated? Does our content and our website do some of the work for us? And if it does, then how do we track and follow up on those leads that come in? And what are our goals for lead generation so that the top of our funnel is always full? You want that brimming over. So the top of our funnel is always full. What goals do we have for lead generation? And these are just some of the questions that are being asked out there. Every one of those questions gets drilled down too. It drills down. If you decide, for example, to consider a quantity, we need more leads, as opposed to a quality strategy, fewer leads are okay, but they're going to be higher quality. Every single one of those decisions means that there are subsidiary decisions that have to be made. And there are trade-offs. If you choose to do more quality leads versus quantity, it means you need sellers who are going to have enough time to do research and to pre-qualify some of the people that they call on. It means they're going to need some different kinds of tools to research the people that they're calling on. It means that they have to do a good job, a really good job in that initial contact. They have to be coming across in a way that shows value and that's highly differentiated from the competition, so that they are expressing value and able to get more time with the leads that they are contacting, because there are fewer of them. Now, it's important, no matter whether you do quantity or quality as your strategy, it's important to remember that effort equals opportunity, because time is limited. No matter how many sellers you have, time is limited. So sellers need some direction on finding the best opportunities and putting more of their effort where those opportunities are. And depending on your role, you might have an opportunity to help them to discover where their opportunities are. You might have insights or information that helps them to see that. Another decision, is it going to be inbound or outbound? The difference in those two, inbound is anytime you have a strategy that drives customers toward the sales team. You have content. You do webinars or podcasts, or you exhibit at shows, or you have advertising on the radio. Anything like that where you are putting something out so that people will find you and come to you, that's an inbound selling strategy, or at least an inbound marketing strategy. You have magnets that draw people toward you. If you're going to do that, you need to know who your buyers are, because you can't target everybody. You'll have to be able to narrow it down and find the persona of the right buyer so that you can channel your efforts to draw the right people in toward you. Now, this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to develop this entire strategy and to sustain it over the long term, so that you build up the name recognition and the desirability of your product is well known, and people begin to trust your brand because it's familiar to them. It takes time. A strategy like this doesn't happen overnight. Even so, there is a migration to more and more inbound selling. Outbound selling is where you find the buyers. And this is where cold calls get made and emails to complete strangers are sent. And there's a sequence or a cadence of follow-ups to begin familiarizing those complete strangers with your products and services that you have to offer. Of course, even with outbound, we need leads. We need a list of people to call. And that's where resources, typically from marketing, sometimes from other places, will come in. Most companies have a blend of an inbound and an outbound strategy, and sellers have a lot to grapple with just with this part of their sales process alone. Remember, we're still right up there at the top of the funnel. That's where people are figuring out who to call on. They're qualifying them. They're looking to figure out which of all these leads are the best ones to take the next steps with. And whether it's inbound or outbound, by the time a seller has identified a potential buyer, the very next thing that happens, you'll remember in our funnel, is that they assess the needs. They do some discovery work with the buyer to find out what the best solution is going to be. Eventually, there's a proposal and a presentation, and it's got to have value at the forefront. It's got to be relevant and meaningful to each individual buyer because of the fact that our 4 laws of value say value is highly personal. Hopefully, they're tapping into something intrinsic with that proposal that they offer so that they're able to close the sale, get referrals, and continue to build up their own trustworthiness and personal brand in the marketplace. The challenges that sellers face are numerous. It's around all of those functions that I've described to you. Your sales management team has their own challenges, and they're very real too. Their own challenges related to forecasting and budgeting appropriately and resourcing the sellers and creating territories for marketplace pressures that will optimize their ability to find the opportunities and capture as many of them as possible. So that's our really high level view of selling and some of the ways that you might interface with sellers, as well as some of the things that you might find useful if you're going to do some selling work of your own. And you will, because we all sell. Selling is just something that we do anytime we have an idea or an initiative that we want others to buy into. Don't forget, I gave you a link to a blog. You're welcome to join our Connect to Sell community if you'd like to be receiving information like this on a regular basis. Or if you are not so interested in the sales function, take a look at our Connect to Lead blog instead. It's the one that's focused on management and leadership challenges that you might face. Thanks for joining the webinar today. If you're someone who's attending on demand and weren't able to be here live, well, by all means, find me on LinkedIn, send me an email, and let's continue the conversation. Thanks for the questions that you posted here today live, and come back next month. Remember, we're talking next month about leading change.